Right, greetings, hello. So welcome back to the Philosophy Club here in the middle of France, and this will be my last Philosophy Club for a few weeks because I'm off to England for the wedding of my daughter, which is very exciting, in Cambridge. So so there'll be like a gap of about 3 weeks, but I'm sure you'll do well, you know, and you can catch up with all my former talks and stuff. So what we're going to do this Sunday is we're going to carry on what we started last week, comparing the Sufi tradition, the names of God in Islam, the 99 names, and we're going to compare and contrast those with the sort of very universal tarot of the gods, which includes the names of God in all different religions. It includes Allah, it includes Yahweh, even Jesus as a card, because many people regard him as divine, the Son of God. So I think it's going to be interesting, again, to compare these two completely different kind of traditions, but, you know, I'm arguing they go back to a perennial, universal tradition, like Aldous Huxley would have said. Okay, so fire away. Let's take the first two.
Okay. I hope I'm saying this right. The Exalter?
The Exalter,
Yeah.
yes. I believe that is indeed the correct name. Let me find out the Arabic. Aha. Right, so the Exalter, number 31, Ar-Rafi. Is it connected, is there another one near it called the Abaser?
No, not nearby.
Okay. Right. Well, I'm not sure if technically these are two or if they're one, but in the reference book here, the Exalter and the Abaser come as a sort of a dual.
Okay.
Let me see if I can find from another source. Right. The idea being that God, you know, elevates you, exalts you, but also can abase you. Or is it is it the Exalter or the Exalted?
Wait. No, you're right, I found it. It was really close. So close I didn't see it. The Abaser, yes.
Ah, it is there.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Right, so no, okay. So we'll do the Exalter because that's a separate name of the deity. And what are we going to compare that to? Among all the gods, who is it that exalts and brings good fortune, you know, and brings everything into a good place? Well, that's a good question. Yes. We can't have God because we had that last time. I think we're going to have Thor, the Ace of Pentacles in the tarot, or the Ace of Earth. I'm going to have Thor because Thor is a very auspicious god for the old Anglo-Saxons and the Germanic-speaking tribes of Europe, Northern Europe, Scandinavians and so on. And he was the god that got stuff done and always made things come right. If you're in trouble, you called on Thor. And we still have a day of the week named after him in English, Thor's Day or Thursday. he was super strong. So anything you needed doing, he could fix it. And he would exalt. He didn't want to be the absolute top god. He was happy to work under Odin, who was the god of wisdom. And this is itself quite intelligent, because the warrior, Thor was the god of the kind of, the macho Scandinavian type warriors. But they knew that actually it's important to let the wisdom people be in charge. So they worked under Odin. And Thor used his strength in the pursuit of goodness and truth and beauty, and would exalt people he came into contact with. The Frisians worshipped Thor. In Tacitus, the Roman historian, it says in Germania that the people appear to be indigenous, he said. And he describes what the Germans are like, and he says they worship this, one of the gods they worship is that of Thor. Another name for him was Thunor, so he's the thunder god. And of course when it thunders it's good news, because the rain's coming. And at this time on global warming planet we need rain. So we've heard thunder today in Protect here, and that's always jolly good. He has a hammer, which is a dual-purpose tool. Normally it puts up buildings, it makes boats, it fixes broken chariots or carts. It's really useful. But if on occasion it's needed, it's magical hammer like a boomerang. It can take out an opponent, and it can, deal with mischievous and naughty people. But it can exalt. And he has a beautiful wife, who occasionally he would have to defend her honour and all that stuff. But he was, a great lover of his consort. There are rune stones found all over Scandinavia. For instance, in Denmark, a rune has been found saying, "May Thor hallow these runes." In other words, it was really sacred to the rune masters of the Anglo-Saxon and ancient Germanic people, who were the wisdom people. They used letters, the runes, and Thor honoured them. I argue in my book, The Qabalah Runes, that Thurisatz, the rune, is connected with the Tav letter of the Hebrew alphabet, 22nd letter of the Hebrew alphabet, which means a sign or a mark, similar to theta in Greek. And I argue that this rune, th, this sound, Thor, th, gives us thought and thinking, and also thank you, because when you say thank you in English, you're saying I'm thinking of you. That's the etymology of thank you. It means I'm thinking about you because what you did was really nice. And that's really sweet. It means my consciousness is reaching out to you. Thank you. I think of you. And that's Thor in his metaphysical energy. He's not just, the kind of idea of him as a sort of great blonde giant wielding a hammer, that's just picture language, as Hagen would say. The actual language is the thinking behind that. And in Hebrew, the word tevuach means understanding, comes from this same Qabalah rune, as did tohar, meaning fair of form, comely, and favoured, i.e. exalted. And also, one of the words the Hebrew priests wore on their breastplate was thumim, which was a sort of sacred stone that would do oracles, it's thought. Nobody quite knows, it's in the Bible. A bit like the Hebrew runes. And I'm arguing in my Hebrew runes book that if you trace back pre-biblically, the Hebrew tribes were related to the other tribes of the Hamito-Semitic and Indo-European people. Also, the word for a female follower of Dionysus is a Thyad, who trembles with ecstasy at the approach of the god. And the thymus in the breast is what gets excited in the presence of a deity, the thymus. It's mentioned by Homer. That's where the sort of the soul is. And also we have the word thyrsus of Dionysus. Now, the thyrsus was a kind of a staff tipped with a pine cone and a sacred wand, which denotes the trembling ecstasy that we feel in the presence of a beautiful god like Dionysus. It's interesting, the Quakers tremble with ecstasy when they go into their silent meditation because they're in the presence of the Holy Spirit. People used to mock them and say, oh, they're quaking again. But actually the secret of the Quakers is they're in the presence of the divine. And that makes you tremble like in the presence of Dionysus. And of course in this new book, The Immortality Key by Brian Murarescu, a scholar from, I was told about at a Harvard University conference, he argues that the early followers of Jesus were also followers of Dionysus, that they saw one ecstasy. And Dionysus was long gone, a myth, you know, but Jesus was there in Galilee, turning water into wine. And that was what Dionysus's motif was. He could turn water into wine because he wanted people to find that ecstasy. Now I'm saying Thor does the same. He is the exalter. But don't mess with him or he might abase you. So Islam's very clever, you know, it realizes God can be loving and make you amazing and expand. You know, like Putin, he's exalted because he's, you know, he thinks he's riding the crest of history. But, you know, he will be abased because what he's done is wrong and he's used sheer force in a demented way against the good people of Ukraine. He has a real racist attitude against Ukrainians and a real Russist attitude. So that then the abaser catches up with you, which is the next name of God. Final story about Thor, who was the son of Odin, by the way, and who, you know, could take on the forces of evil. We need Thor, you know, to defeat the forces of evil. In the poem The Voluspa, a dead Volva, which is a Norse seer, recounts the history of the universe and foretells the future to Odin, who's in disguise. He's having an interview with this, seer, the Voluspa, is what she speaks. And she describes in the time of Ragnarok, the great battle at the end of time between good and evil, Thor will slay the monstrous snake that is terrorizing the world. The verse reads, "Then comes the mighty son of Hlodin, Odin's son, goes with the monster to fight. Midgar's Vior, in his rage, will slay the worm. 9 feet will go Fjorgyn's son, bowed by the serpent, who feared no foe. All men will their homes forsake." But Thor will have taken on such heavy karma defeating this great serpent that he will only be able to take 9 steps and then he collapses dead. And then it's kind of the end of the world, says the Volva. The sky will turn black and fire will engulf the world. The stars will disappear. Flames will dance before the sky. Steam will rise. And then the world will be covered in water. But then finally it will be raised again, green and fertile. This is Ragnarok, you know, this terrible battle. Some say we're in the middle of that now. Certainly it describes some of the effects of global warming. There are parts of the world where, you know, fire is engulfing the world and the sky turns black from the smoke, which cuts out the stars. if there was a nuclear war, then all the scientists predict there would be a huge nuclear winter, because the dust clouds from all the nuclear bombs going off and destroying all cities would block out the sun for like a few years, which would kill all life on Earth, as we know. A few sort of mollusks and insects would survive, but that's it. And so I would say the important thing is to avoid this Ragnarok coming true, and that requires us to allow God to do the exalting. Nobody can be Thor. When I was a kid, I would dress up and pretend I was Lancelot or whatever in the garden, or Thor or something. But you grow out of that, Only God can be God. Only Thor can be Thor. And we humans have to learn humility and let Allah sort things out, or Odin, or the word God, which is the Anglo-Saxon word for the ultimate. So I think if you're being exalted, always check your humility pulse and make sure that you realise it's not you, it's God. Maybe doing some work through you. Meister Eckhart, who was a very great German theologian, said, "The man of God does absolutely nothing and yet accomplishes everything, because God is doing all the work." So I think that's quite a good thing to remember. It's God that does the exalting and the abasing. So anyway, I'd love to have sat in when I'm sure among the Vikings there were some intelligent rune masters, and when they were travelling around the Mediterranean, they would have sat and met some Sufis, and they could have chatted about, the runes and Sufism. I'm sure some of those conversations happened in history, and it's, we can now have them again. And I would say dialectic debate discussion is better than, taking things so seriously that you kind of kill each other and blow up the world. Loki and Thor are sort of like best friend enemies, because Loki's always teasing Thor. One time he steals the Thor's wife's golden hair. Sif had beautiful golden hair, and Loki steals it, and then he boasts and pretends he slept with her, which he hadn't. This is called flighting, and that's an Old English and Scots word. It means verbal fighting, verbal jousting, but with wit. So you sort of tell somebody something borderline very rude, and then they say something back to you. And this was a thing. It was even allowed at the Scottish court. In fact, King James IV and King James V of Scotland encouraged flighting contests. It was called court flighting. So you'd have one aristocrat sort of insult the other, but they'd always stay just this side of getting the sword out and, threatening each other. But Thor and Loki had a flighting contest. And Loki obviously was very clever, but Thor had enough. And when he claimed to have slept with his wife, Thor went ballistic. And that was like, that's enough, And we have a poem about that. So he was, but they made up, and then they used to help each other, after all. Although I wouldn't really trust Loki as far as I could throw him. There's another wonderful story about Thor, which gives an example of his ability to, his strength. And this is connected with Loki. So they were fighting as usual, who's the best god, who's the strongest, who's the cleverest. "You're so mighty, aren't you, Thor? You're such a big, strong, butch god. But I bet you can't drown this drinking horn." "What do you mean? Give it here," said Thor, They were in a mead hall having a party. And so Thor, grabbed it. It was a very long one, like a really long drinking one. You'd never seen one quite this long, but no problem. Plugged it back, like 2 minutes, drinking it back, you know. And like 3-4 minutes, still drinking. And he put it down, he said, I can't drown it, I can't down it, you've won. But then Loki was backing off him in like terror and alarm and said, oh no, you know, because what he'd done was he'd attached the drinking horn down the, outside the under the door, and it was attached to the fjord. Just about, you know, it was 100 yards long, this drinking horn. It went directly into the field. And what Thor had just done was lower the water levels of all the seas throughout the entire world by like 6 inches. And so Loki was just like terrified. This is a god here, you know, like, but Thor didn't realize what he'd done, you know. So that's, I always like that story because it's a story that sometimes it might feel in life that you have to do a huge amount of stuff just to stay in the same place. Like, you know, you have to do this and that and pay that bill and see that person and write that thing and go to that meeting and blah, blah, blah. And there's all these things you've got to do, and it's not possible to do them all. And how are you going to get them all done? And then there's that 10 things and this thing. Okay, well, that's the point when you have to remember the story of Thor. You know, you've got to do your best, even if it seems impossible. There's so much to do. Like, we've got to stop the war with Ukraine and Russia. We've got to stop global warming. We've got to stop the persecution of women and sexual violence. We have to stop human rights abuse. You know, we have to get people out of prison that are unjustly in prison on death row. We have to get, you know, etc., etc., etc. There's a whole list of stuff. And it might seem like there's no way we can do it all. Might as well just give up. But no, just keep glugging away. And even if all we do it, we all bring it down an inch. Collectively, through the power of Thor, we can do it. You know, that I think is a great teaching story from the runic tradition. You know, we will never get peace, but except through the grace of God. And Thor is one of the names of God, is what I'm arguing. He's also related to the Celtic god Tyrannus. So the Celtic god Tyrannus, who's the god of thunder, who's the local thunder god around here, seems to be exactly the same god. It was in the Germanic tribes, Thor. In the Celtic tribes, Tyrannus. Here in France, he was the most important Gallic deity, and his symbol was a white bull. So there's a lot of white bulls around here in Limousin. And there's an element named after him, thorium, which is a radioactive metallic chemical element. It's 3 times as abundant as uranium in the Earth's crust. And, you know, that's quite cool that he's got an element named after him. Okay, let's see if we can, you know, get peace between the followers of Thor and the followers of Allah, if they realise they're pursuing the Exalter is the same deity. Right, okay, go for it. Next one. Your turn.
All right. The all-seeing.
Ah, the all-seeing. That's a cool one.
For sure.
Right, now. Yes. Al-Basir, the seer of all, I believe, 37. He is the one who is all-seeing, Al-Basir. He sees all that has passed, all there is, and all there will be until the end of time. From the time when he moved the sea of nothingness until after doomsday and the last judgment. He has given... Whoops, hang on. Whoops-a-daisy, sorry about that. There we are. He has given some of his creatures the ability to behold his creation. Some of his creatures see shapes and colours and movements, and some animals have much better sight than we do, eagles, cats. But he has given to man an eye of the heart, to see deeper than what meets the eye. We have an inner eye to see the inner things of life, which in Sufism is called al-batin, the hidden, the esoteric meaning of things. So God is the all-seeing, al-basir, the all-surveying, and it's a beautiful concept, also that so everything we do, everything we think, say, attempt, all the goodness that we try and do, God sees and registers it. Well, the God that comes to mind for this is Aeon, and I'll explain why. Aeon, spelled A-E-O-N, who is the consort of air, 211. Aeon is a little known god. Not many people have heard of him. Few people that are into esoteric philosophy like me and Jungian thought have heard of him, because Jung wrote a whole book about Aeon. Carl Jung was an amazing Swiss psychiatrist based in Zurich who was an absolute encyclopedic student of all esoteric matters. And he studied Aeon, wrote a whole book about the psychological meaning of this god. Here's a picture of Aeon based on antiquity, classical sculptures and reliefs and stuff. So he's surrounded by the signs of the zodiac, the 12 signs of the zodiac, which represent all time, the infinity of time. Because time in philosophy is not just a quantitative thing, it has qualitative meaning. So sometimes they're amazing, they pass really quickly, they're incredible. Sometimes really slow and boring. Time has qualitative meaning. He's surmounted by a snake, which is the kind of energy of life. He holds an hourglass and a staff, and he has wings, because he can fly anywhere in an instant, like Flash, only like a million times faster. The Marvel character, Flash. Aeon is the Flash behind the universe. And his orb or circle encompasses the whole universe and the zodiac. The time, so Aeon represents time, and it's perpetual, unbounded, ritual, and cyclical. And Aeon is thus a god of the cyclic ages and the circle of the year. And in the classical era, he became associated with the mystery religions concerned with the afterlife, the mysteries of Cybele, the great mother goddess, the Dionysian mysteries, and the Orphic religion, as well as the Mithraic mysteries and the Christian mysteries. In Latin, this god would be called Eternitas, eternity, or Seculum. And archaeologists have found these reliefs of Aeon. He was a very sophisticated deity, known to the intellectuals of classical paganism. And he sees everything because all time is his. And if you think about it, time permeates everything. As Einstein pointed out, time and space are really one thing. Time-space is one phenomenon, which is very difficult for us to understand. But that is the nature of Aeon. Aeon is the eternity of time, from the biggest time, like however long the universe is going to last, down to the tiniest little time that it takes one photon to nip around, or one electron to nip around in the microcomputer or whatever, or in my cells. I believe the smallest unit of time is what's called the Planck constant. Physicists have worked out you can't go smaller than that. And so Aeon is the god of the very big and the very tiny, and therefore sees everything, because he is inside everything. He is all time and all space. There is an important work by a classical Egyptian scholar called Hor Apollo, which meant Horus and Apollo combined, so that's pretty cool, called Hieroglyphica. And he says that Aeon is represented as a serpent that hides its tail under the rest of its body. And he wrote about, the deity, Aeon, because the Egyptians were very interested in cosmic time. And that's why they believed in Ma'at, the deity of truth and righteousness, because how we act determines our future for all cosmic time. If I am evil and I slay somebody or I rape someone, I've stained my soul for eternity, unless I can achieve eventually after reincarnations and purification some kind of penance and catharsis. So if we realise that Aeon is watching our every move internally and externally, and wants the good for us, wants us to make life a comedy and not a tragedy. We're supposed to be living in a rom-com, this planet, where we all fall in love with each other in the last scene, and the killers turn into nice people. That's what Aeon wants, and he's got enough time to work it out, because in the end that's what will happen. And that's called universalism, the idea that eventually everything will come right, that the good will win, even though it looks like the baddies are winning sometimes. So that's the perspective that Aeon brings to things, which is, I think, the same huge cosmic perspective as Al-Basir, the quality that Allah brings, the all-seeing one. And there was another Latin writer, Martianus Capella, in the 5th century AD, who said Aeon is Chronos, which is time. And so Chronos Aeon became for him the consort of Ops, who was identified as physis, meaning matter, everything that has form, matter. So time plus matter equals everything that is. That's what Aeon is. So Jung wrote this amazing book, Aeon, a major work of his last years. Its central theme is the symbolic representation of the psychic totality of all things through the concept of the self. We all pursue, who am I, what am I? When we're young, we ask that question. Eventually, as we grow wiser and we travel around the world, we've done different professions and we've fallen in love several times, and we've played different roles, we eventually realise, well, I'm a self. And this is what Jung called individuation. Now what he says is that the historical equivalent of this psychic totality is the figure of Christ. Christ becomes like the self at the heart of certainly the Western consciousness. And he, in the book, Aeon, he investigates how the figure of Aeon was taken up by Gnostic Christians to represent Christ in his higher nature. So Christ is eternity, and this is in the official Bible, like the Alpha and the Omega is said of Christ. He's the beginning and the end of all things. Well, that's Aeon. He's the God who encompasses the beginning of everything and the ending of everything. So Aeon, the transcendent Christ, incarnates into Jesus of Nazareth, say the Gnostics. And yet, ultimately, he goes back to being beyond time and space, embedded in eternity. So Jung's meditation in Aeon is about this paradox. Can one man, however wise, embody the vastness of all time and eternity?